All right. So what we're going to show you here is a typical, what we call a supply chain assessment that has basically been bred off of these internal metrics and internal processes we've developed. We've actually also applied that to our sales process and our client service process and said, hey, you know, if somebody would like us to take a look at their company and see how we could help them, what's the best way to do that? Can we reimagine, you know, the RFQ process? So what we have here is some sample data that was sent to us by a client. It's all been anonymized, and so don't worry about that. But this will sort of help show you the type of data we deal with in our industry and how you can go from, you know, again, that tribal knowledge, taking your best guess type of action to strategic business initiatives based on data-driven analytics. So what we have here is all the data that was received. And whenever I do an application, I always like to throw all the data in a table, just like you were using a spreadsheet. So anybody who, you know, whether they don't like change or they're just more, frankly, it's more so they're just more comfortable that if you go ahead in the application and you want to drill down into something, you don't have to worry about, oh, is this chart here going to be correct? You know what? We provide you all of the data so that you can drill down into anything and view the source data. So personally, it's a bit of a preference of mine, but throughout using Click, it's proven valuable because you're going to undoubtedly get a ton of questions from people who, whether they don't trust the data or they're not familiar with your process with the data. And for me, the ability to immediately answer them on the fly is tremendously impactful. So from here, we generate a dashboard. Anyone who uses Click knows dashboards, right? So this would be our supply chain dashboard. What we say is showing people a view of themselves they may not have seen before, right? So we have some KPIs up top, some typical KPIs for us being in the indirect supply chain space, our total spend, number of vendors, total categories. That's what you see here by the UNSPSC codes, distinct catalog items. All these things matter because they go into how we're going to handle you know, a customized client solution here. Here you can see some major charts we refer to. We're going to be spend by vendor, POs by vendor, and spend by category. Spend by category is another part of our stack that's near and dear to my heart. We actually use some AI to help categorize this data because one of the things that we found is that the incoming data that clients categorize is almost always not up to par. And that is a significant inhibitor for them to perform strategic sourcing initiatives because they don't have categories to base those strategic sourcing initiatives off of, right? So you end up saying, oh, I want to do electrical stuff. Let's pull all the light bulbs, and you all know how that can go, right? So this is a really good indicator here of a thumb in the wind. Hey, do you think this is where you're spending your money? And this oftentimes gets us into really good conversations about how we can help people. Now, as we go further, we can see some interesting supply chain oriented metrics. So as an example, with this client, they buy a lot of power transmission and bearings. And if you click on that, you can see, wow, there's 743 vendors. That's a lot, you know, in case anybody didn't know that. But something that I immediately come and take a look at is, hey, you know, you guys sure have a lot of different motion industries vendors. What's going on there? And, you know, if we take a look here and we were to search through that, we would find that there are a significant amount of records for this particular vendor. So one of the things that tells us right here is, number one, data quality is an issue. Number two, your spend could be fragmented. And number three, your spend may be going off contract, right? Because a lot of times in the supply chain, your contract is specified to a site, it's specified to a vendor in your system, and that vendor communicates over a contract number to ensure you're getting the right price. Well, if you're operating in a system where you have a significant amount of vendors that are staggered in your system and not all lumped under the same master vendor, you could have some issues there. So that was something that we immediately noticed with this client and said, hey, you know, your data could use a good scrubbing, to put it nicely. So another thing that we were able to do with this is develop what we call the supply chain map. Now, anyone who works into supply chain and logistics would love to see something like this. It basically tells you here, hey, this is where, so these circles represent client sites, and these triangles represent vendors, and the lines are all the different, you know, all the distance that the shipment has traveled. So this, I mean, there's plenty of use cases for this, reduced time to delivery, reduced freight costs, Are you buying within your region? You know, certain industries like electrical are very region specific, so you can see if you're overstepping any agreements, or maybe, hey, if you realize there's a vendor that's not necessarily following along with those agreements, maybe you can take advantage of that and use that as a piece of business intelligence. So a few things that would be interesting to point out here. Number one, if you were a site manager who worked at, say, the Mineral Springs plant, we could actually click this and bang, we can see where all of our shipments are coming from. This is extremely powerful. These guys are in the middle of the country, so it's no surprise there's lines stretching to East Coast, each coast, sorry. But as an example, you know, why am I buying all this stuff from California? Is there a reason for that? I'm kind of in the middle of the country. Is there something closer? And here, you know, we could say, okay, well, here's all the products I'm buying by manufacturer. You know, and if we take a look as an example, these guys are a significant portion of the spend. Okay. And if we remove the vendor location, or I apologize, the vendor location and the client location, now we can see, well, it looks like these guys actually ship all across the country, which tells us in our industry that these are likely an OEM, someone who controls their own distribution. That will help us understand. We actually bucket original equipment manufacturers into different savings categories. We guarantee savings as part of our contracts, and sometimes you can't negotiate with an original equipment manufacturer. So this right here could be a huge piece of intelligence for us to understand, hey, is it worth pursuing negotiations with them? Should we try to buy off the client's paper, etc.? These are very real pressing issues with our industry. And you know, you can imagine the possibilities from this view are only limited by the amount of questions you can ask, right? So as we move on, another interesting metric for us is PO efficiency. Being a supply chain company that deals in transactional values for our clients, if you're purchasing a significant amount of a product on many purchase orders that are a low cost, you're actually, you know, driving up the cost of that part due to the administrative burden of placing those purchase orders by a pretty significant margin. So what you see here is we have some outliers, and that's just because of the data quality here, right? You know, we have this one part where there's $40 million to spend on. This is obviously, you know, a bucket that they're using for, you know, many different purchases. But if we zoom in here on the scatter plot, as usual, we'll start to see some trends emerge. So zoom in here a couple times. And what we have here on the x-axis is how much money is being spent on the product, and the y-axis is the number of purchase order lines for that product. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at anything that's been purchased, let's say over 50 times. There you go. Check that box. And with a spend of, there's a lot of items here, but typically in our industry, they're low volume transactions. So let's just say $10,000 and see what it looks like. All right, well, as you can see, it's still a pretty large data set. So right off the bat, what we can say is these, although there's a large amount of transactions, they are a high dollar value. So while it is interesting to take a look at these aren't necessarily the problem we're referring to. What we're trying to look for here are items that have low dollar value, low amount of spend, and therefore these transactional costs make up a significant portion of their value. So now we can see, I'm going to re-drill down into this. I'm missing some values near 0. And up. And say here's a spend, so we will squish the spend again. And we'll do it one more time. Let's take a look at the lowest of the low. We're talking stuff we spent $10,000 or less on. Even so, it gets bigger. So I'm sure anyone dealing with the scatter plot and click has experienced this before. So as we zoom in and in, you can see this is quite the problem. So here we are talking about parts, boom, with over 25 transactions and a spend of under $400, right? So here, our average transaction volume is going to be very low. Take a look at any of these as an example. So we've purchased this item 250, for rounding purposes, $250 worth of this item on 21 different purchase orders, right? So that's a very low mark for an average purchase order amount. That's like a $12 or $13 purchase order every time you're purchasing this product. Now, when you take into account the administrative burden of forecasting the demand, placing a purchase order, receiving confirmation for that purchase order, receiving it in, and putting it on the shelf, that's estimated at somewhere between $50 and $100 per transaction, depending on what consultancy you listen to. The point is, if your average purchase order value is below that, you're literally doubling your cost of that product. Although you may not realize it in the product itself, it's a significant business inefficiency that's costing you a lot of money. So these are certain products that, as a supply chain company, SDI may recommend, hey, let's take a look at your usage of these, right? You're purchasing this product 20 times, 30 times, 50 times within the course of 1 year. Why don't you increase your inventory? I understand that you want to keep your inventory lean, but at this point, you're actually increasing your operational costs by placing all these orders and keeping that administrative burden on your company. We would recommend that you increase or at least look at the forecast for these items going forward and increase your inventory that you're going to hold for these products. That way, you can hold more on the shelf, you run into less stockouts, and you're going to save yourself some money there. Again, different types of analytics enabled by this. And finally, this is my favorite. So previously, we talked about the issues and the struggles with supply chain companies and contracting, right? So it's not just in that supply chain, or I apologize, that sourcing wheel universe that I previously mentioned. How do you hold suppliers to their contracted pricing? How do you know that they're going to be doing the right thing and only charging you one price for the product over the course of the contract? So what we built here is just a simple view that shows the number of different prices paid for a product. Now, as you can see here, some of these are wacky. This should be straight or perhaps a slight incline or decline depending on your negotiation skills. It should not be a heart monitor, okay? So what you see here, if we take a look at the data, speaks to their data quality, and this just shows that they're using these part numbers as a bucket for many other purchases. But if we go down and we say, okay, and you know what, I like to develop on the fly. It's one of my favorite things about Click. So if we did something instead, and instead of using the catalog number, we took a description for argument's sake. Okay, that should hopefully, now while we're still going to see some things that are obviously one item, or many items like material, not very helpful. You can see here, these should be, distinctive items based on what we're seeing. A bearing with dimensions in the name. This seems like it'd be good enough to me to trust as a legitimate, purchase of the same item. Yet when we look here, I mean, this is crazy, right? Every time we purchase this item, depending on where we're purchasing it, and you can see it, down here, we're going from $7.90 up to $45, back down to $7.90, up to $32, $33. This is not a small increase or decrease. These are on the order of hundreds of percentage point swings here. So to me, understanding the problems within our industry and seeing that there's different manufacturers and vendor part numbers, I would again chalk this up to bad data, but you can see how this becomes challenging because if you look at this, it's a bearing, you got the diameter, the inner diameter, outer diameter, the width, you even have a manufacturer listed here, but it still seems like based on their data record, they're actually buying it from a different manufacturer. So again, one of the things I like about this is the fact that you can explore the data. Even though you might be looking for one thing, you're going to find something totally different that still informs your opinion. And based on what I just saw, I'm going to change this to actually be vendor part. And let's just see if that makes a difference. All right. Now with the vendor part, let's hope we find the same product here. Okay. Or a consistent product. So let's see what else has this part number. Look at that. We're seeing the same types of graphs. It's very interesting. Let's go down and see if there's anything below. As someone who runs this stuff a lot, 30, 50, 90 is unusual. Usually I'm looking for something that has 10, 15 prices, which can show the fluctuation of a product in a year. Perfect. This is what we actually think it should look like. Now, granted, 22 is a lot here. And you can see here it's relatively stable, but this is something that you could tell a story of your supply chain. You could say, hey, back in 2016, I purchased this for $4. We took a price increase, but you know what? I said enough of that. I put it out to bid, I negotiated, and I found a better price. And that price held for, a year, and then we took a slight price increase. This is actually a story of an item you can tell based on this metric. That is actually good. This is what we would expect to see if someone is managing a contract, they go through and do a sourcing event, and the sourcing event pays off. So again, we're not always discovering the bad. Sometimes we're looking at some good proof of our work, right? And then if we take a look here, this is a perfect example of where we might see erratic pricing. The reason that I say it's a perfect example is because here we see the part number is the same, the description is the same, the vendor number may change, but the manufacturer is the same. So even though they may be going to a different vendor, and frankly, the fact that they are going to a different vendor may be part of the problem. But even though they're going to a different vendor, they're buying the same part number from the same manufacturer. So it's safe for us to say that this is the same product. And if you take a look, these are the kinds of contract non-compliance that should really stick out to anyone who works in supply chain, right? You do your diligence, you negotiate a price of this product for $10 from a certain vendor, and then boom, all of a sudden it shoots up to $40. And then somebody goes back onto the plan that you negotiated. The next purchase order from the successful plant is processed, and it's back to that price. And then you know what? Somebody else buys from another vendor for whatever reason. And again, this is not necessarily always attributed to going to a different vendor or someone buying around the program. These could also be indications of what I spoke about, in my previous slides, saying, hey, you know what, we actually have been buying this from the same vendor or under the same contract, but you know what, during this time in 2016 and during this time in 2017, we had an outage because we ran out of stock in this item. And that's actually the rush fee. And the rush fees for these products are usually more than the products themselves. So again, what we're looking for here, the insights that we can garner are really only limited by the questions that we can ask, but this is a tremendous view to help you gain some analysis into your supply chain and understand whether or not you're being held to the contractually agreed pricing and agreement that you made with your vendor during that previously diagrammed sourcing process. And finally, my favorite thing, I said the last thing was my favorite thing. You can tell I like data, right? So my other favorite thing that this enables us to do is forecast savings, right? So on a few slides ago, I showed that we built this large data stack, and part of that was building what we call Project Itemine, sort of a repository of all of our past data. I mentioned that, we've had this data all along, and we've just never been able to leverage it. Well, what we did with Project Itemine was we took manufacturer names and part numbers, took them all to a consistent format, clean them, and now when people send us their data, we can get a thumb in the wind for how much money we're going to save them through our program, because we can run those manufacturer names and part numbers, albeit they have to be there. And that's why you can see here we only benchmarked about $750,000 out of their $200 million that were provided in this file. But again, this is with no human effort besides running the SQL script, right? So basically, we took manufacturer name and part number, we ran a search through our database to see what matched, ran some tests to make sure they were indeed the same item. And what we can see here is based on, the client spending about $840,000 on these products, SDI's supply chain would have acquired them for 718 grand, which would have saved you a total of about 14.7%. And again, the power of click, you can take a look at what they actually are, right? So let's see everything we'd actually save money on. Let's say we had a stipulation that said, hey, if we could buy it cheaper, we will. Otherwise, you keep the spend, just for argument's sake. Well, then we can see that if you exclude the losers, we're up at 32% savings, which is really significant. I mean, that is, even if you consider this small amount of spend, this tail spend, a rounding error compared to the direct spend, that's a significant savings you could be realizing or that you're losing by not implementing a solution like this. So as an example, any of these can be tied to a real item. So let's just click one of them, So this item is it's a latch with a flexible key. It's purchased at many different plants. SDI found that we were able to purchase it, for about $204. And depending on the site that purchased it, the client was paying anywhere, all sorts of different prices for this product. So essentially, this helps us point out, where we could bring savings to them, but not only bring savings to them, but bring uniformity to their process, right? Because it's not just about, a piece price savings here, getting this item in stock faster. While all those things matter, it's about holistically changing the way that your organization makes decisions, about automating whatever processes you can, and about driving those decisions off of data, which, this digital strategy that we've developed and implemented, Health by Bardes, with Click as the visualization layer really has enabled